Ngahui Freed, who will be speaking to us during the public forum. So now I'd like to ask Councillor Craig Pauling to open the meeting with a mihi, whakatau and a karakia. Thank you.
Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga. Kia mā kina ki ita, kia mā taratara ki tai. E hi aki ana te apakura, he tia, he hoko, he hauhu, a ti hei mauriora. A te mihi tuatahi mihi ki nā atua kaharawa, ho mai o kaha, ho mai o aroha kia mātou i tēnei wā, a i nā wā katoa hoki. A ka huri au taku whakaro ki nā tini aitua, ko ea te ki te pō. E nā mate, moe mai, hoki mai. Apati hono, tātai hono, tōka mati ki tōka mati, apati hono, tātai hono, nā kānuhi ora, kua tai mai nei, a tēnā koutou. A tēnā koutou, nā kai kaunihera, nā kai mahi o tēnei kaunihera, ki nā manuheri, kei waho, ai tēnā koutou. Kia Kathy, Jade, Ben, nā huia, nau mai hara mai, i wero mai, i tō whakaro, whakatako tō kōrero, i tō kaupapa, tēnei te mihi kia koutou. Tēnā tātou, e pai tēnei rā, e pai tēnei hui, tēnā koutou. Kia ora.
Thank you, Councillor Pauling. There's apologies today. We've received apologies from Councillor Megan Hands and Tumu Taiao, Yayan Cranwell, and Councillor Tane Apanui. There's no conflicts of interest other than what we've got on our register that anyone's advised me of. Now we'll be moving into our public forum, and I would like to invite Kathy Lum Webb, Jade Webb, and Ben Tufnell to come into the room. You will be receiving in a moment some hard copies of the presentation that Kathy is wanting to table, but they're just being copied at the moment. Thank you, Catherine. Welcome, Kathy. It's not very good with us all wearing masks, but you're welcome to be as you are to speak. And welcome, Jade. So what we'll be doing is we'll give you 10 minutes to speak, and then we'll have a bell ringing at about 9 minutes, and then we'll have a little period of time when councillors can ask you any questions, and then what we'll do is we'll ask you to wait while we move a resolution around this to formalise your presentation. So it's lovely you could come today, and just off you go, just speak to us. That'd be lovely. Thanks.
Kia ora, tēnā koutou katoa, ko Kathy Lum Webb toko ingoa. Madam Chair, councillors and participants, thank you for this opportunity to speak on behalf of the Bays communities, Aotearoa of Rapaki, Cass Bay and Corsia Bay. This presentation won't take too long because we raise one big issue, the bus 28. Next year, we have 29 to 35 Kashmir High students from our bays that need to get to and from school. The current bus system is something like the story of a young tamariki and the three bears, where one bowl of porridge is too hot, another too cold, and one is just right. The public bus 28 at 7 a.m. is too early, the one at 7:50 is too late, but a change of schedule to a 7:20 public bus would be much better. However, there is also the risk that so many new students will swamp the existing services, which means a 7:50 a.m. special door-to-door school bus service would be perfect. This service would pick up students from Rapaki, then continue via Cass and Corsia Bays, dropping students to Kashmir High, leaving seats on other buses for existing commuters. So now to give a little background. Firstly, we lost the 535 bus, and that was over 2 years ago. And then we lost the Harkis subsidized school bus over a year ago. In 2021, we had about 18 students, and our families somehow managed. Personally, our whānau got an electric vehicle to cart out Tamariki to and from school. Sometimes students catch the 7 a.m. express into the bus exchange, then travelled to Kashmir by 8 a.m., but then school starts at 8:40. Other times, students biked or walked into Littleton, which takes about 25 to 45 minutes. They got on the bus 28, then connected to the Orbiter to school. The afternoon commute took even longer. Kashmir High School finishes at 3:10. These students hopped on the Orbiter, then got off, walked around the corner, and took the bus 28 onwards to Littleton. They then biked or walked back to the bays, arriving home around 5 p.m. That makes for like a 10-hour school day. Now that we have up to 35 Kashmir High students needing transport for 2022, it makes sense to look for solutions. With this in mind, our Bay communities had a meeting with Ross service from ECAN. 26 people attended, along with 15 of our Tamariki. Our meeting also covered the Bus 28 review and public submissions for the port-to-port bus service. We understand its solution for 2023. We need something for 2022, please. So how can we solve the Kashmir High School commute? We see 3 solutions for this. A, putting on a special door-to-door bus service for the school run, departing from Rapaki at 7:50 and returning in the afternoon about 4 p.m. Both the morning and afternoon commutes would be wonderful. We understand there is a public bus just for students that run via Redley Street and through Huntsbury Hill, some of which our Bay students use. So something like this for the Bays could work, and it could pick up students from Littleton, Heathcote, and parts of Opawa. Option B, a bus schedule change to the current service with the public bus 28 departing Rapaki at 7:20. And C, having a trial school bus running from Littleton to the Bays for the students mornings and afternoons. One example could be a trial if the Ministry of Education could divert the Littleton Primary School bus 40 minutes earlier in the morning and bring the high schoolers into Littleton. That could also work. At least it helps with our morning commute, but the risk of also overloading the existing bus services. For 2022, please, ECAN, we really hope that you and the Ministry of Education can help our 35 students. The 2022 cohort of students will be 29 to 35, and that's a full bus load. So we really hope we could get a better bus service. In summary, for the 29 to 35 students going to Kashmir High in 2022, the 7 a.m. public bus is too early, the 7:50 too late, and having a 7:20 public bus service would be much better. But a special door-to-door service departing Rapaki at 7:50, returning at 4 would be just perfect. Just a couple of suggestions raised by the community at our public meeting held on 3rd November. A shopping bus ideally at 10 a.m. from Rapaki and returning 2 p.m. for the Kaumatua and elders of the Bays could be helpful, but we understand the bus review could address this. We think a beach bus from New Brighton via Sumner, Littleton, and all around to Purao and back could be a brilliant addition over summer, reducing traffic jams over our narrow roads, easing parking issues, while also increasing access to our beaches for people with limited transport options. I had Luana Swindells from Rapaki as our second speaker, but she sends her apologies. So apologies, Luana from Rapaki sends her apologies for not being here this morning. On her behalf and from another parent, Kitty Couch, I would like to share their concerns regarding Bus 28 and the public bus issues. Kia ora from Kitty. I have lived in Rapaki for 40 years, and it has always been a struggle to use public transport around the bays. Quite often, we have to walk from Littleton to Rapaki, taking over an hour. Now with our young Tamariki, the service is so restricted that we as parents are having to trip to and from the city for the school run. Our whānau fully support the suggestion to increase the public transport for the bays or a school bus that could transport our children to school safely. Ngā mihi Kitty Couch. Kia ora from Luana Swindells. For several years, Rapaki, including the surrounding bays, has for the most part had a relatively reliable public bus that has met our needs. Unfortunately, this service has declined significantly over the past few years, but it has also coincided with the 2019 withdrawal of the Ministry of Education funded bus service for Kashmir High School. Luana has outlined and shared her whānau experiences of the lack of bus transport in her area. It has affected her tamariki, kaumatua, and community. Please take a moment and read her experiences. And in summary, Luana's whānau has gone from a one-car household to owning 3 cars and soon a 4th car because the family need to travel for work and school. Her son, while commuting to and from school on the public bus, would sometimes have an 11-hour day. Kia ora, thank you so much for your time, and we look forward to a response soon. I leave a copy of our community minutes along with our presentation notes. Happy to take questions. Thank you again.
Well, thank you very much, Kathy. And we're just going to circulate those notes now. Has anybody got a question they'd like to ask? And by the way, we're sorry we had to not have you at the previous council, and we got that marked up a bit, so it's good that you're here today. Is there anybody, Councillor Phil Clearwater and then Councillor Ian McKenzie?
Thank you very much, Kathy, for your submission, and it's timely because my first point, perhaps you might elaborate. My understanding is that you'd really, you and the residents and students would like a resolution to this before the new school year starts early next year. That's the first question. And if I also just wanted to check with you, in your discussions with our transport staff, have you also had discussions with staff from the Ministry of Education?
Yes, we have. The Ministry of Education talked about the subsidized bus that we had that would take students to Linwood, but Kashmir High and Linwood are also zoned for these schools. And so we feel that Rapaki, Cass and Corsia have kind of fallen between the cracks of having a school bus, but we understand that there is a public bus that goes apparently anytime after 7 would be suitable, bringing kids to school, but that it doesn't kind of work, and hence, you know, it's too early, too late, not quite right. Yeah, it makes it a very long day. So yes, we have.
Councillor Ian and then Councillor Vicky.
Look, Madam Chair, I've just read your notes about. I was going to ask the question why the Ministry of Education would withdraw the bus service, but you've actually got this written here, so I'll reread this and I'll get my answer. Thank you.
Thanks. Councillor Vicky Southworth.
I'd just like to ask what sort of effect that very long school day has on your children. Do you feel like it's affecting their education?
Personally, for me, I felt we had a bit of benefit because Jade would take the bus or the Hackers bus, and then it stopped for a year. And in that year, I kind of managed it because I had another kid starting, and so we invested in an EV, and I just kind of found it as a way of, you know, commuting with the kids and spending that time and things like that. So it kind of worked for a while, but as I got work and things like that, it became a real juggle and a struggle, and also because they had after school programs. And now in 2022, I will have 2 kids going to Kashmir High, and once again with more activities and more commuting, and with the new cohort of about 11 new year 9s, I believe they need a service. I'm not really speaking for me, but for the community. Yeah.
Kia ora, Korua. Thanks for your deputation. On the bit of paper here, I think we might have been missing a page about your option B and C. Not your fault, maybe just when we printed it might not have come through, but can you just remind me what your option B was again, and then I've got another question after that.
Sure. Yep. Option B, a scheduled bus change to the current service with the bus 28 departing Rapaki at 7:20. So currently we have a 6:25, a 7 a.m., a 7:50 only in the mornings, and in the evenings we have 5, 6 and something. So it just does not cater for school students at all.
And you had an option C about, I think I heard it right, just the bus that goes between Littleton and Railway
Yes.
or Brown States.
Yeah.
So that would work. It's not the best, but that would work.
Yes, that would work only. Yes, that would work if we didn't want to add too much into the budget, and if Ministry of Education would kind of help out, because they already send a bus in the morning that takes Littleton Primary School. So by diverting it like 40 minutes earlier, they could maybe bring the high schoolers into Littleton. Because currently, from what we've been hearing, there are about 10 cars that travel to the bays just to drop kids. And I find sometimes by the time I get to Littleton, I might as well go to school, because then the kids would have to commute on 2 buses to get to school. And we're talking about teenagers, so it can get a bit tricky. So we just carry on.
Thank you. Any further questions? Well, thank you very much, Kathy. Just if you just stay there a minute, we'll just move a resolution. So I'm looking for someone to move. Moved by Councillor Phil Clearwater, seconded by Councillor Craig Pauling, that the council receives the public forum matter from Kathy Lum-Webb, Cass Bay resident, regarding Cass Bay number 28 bus and other matters, and refers this to the CE for a response. So that's moved by Councillor Clearwater, seconded by Councillor Pauling. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour, please say aye. Anybody opposed? There's being nobody opposed, that's carried. So thank you very much for taking your time to come here. You will receive a letter from us about this matter, and there was some urgency before Christmas. Is that?
Not necessarily before Christmas, in my view, that's a short time frame, but I guess perhaps if some of us might be able to have a discussion with Kathy about where we've got to before we sort of get any resolution.
Yeah, that'd be good. And then we'll get a letter back to you, and we'll be talking to you. So thank you very much for coming. It's really good that you told us all this, because if you don't tell us, we don't know. So we'll do our best. So thank you very much. All right, Catherine will show you out now. Thank you. All right, our next speaker, who I believe is in the ante room and about to come in, watching on the news feed, it's Nahuia Freed. We welcome her, and she's going to speak to us about the use of buses and the importance of a good bus network. We just have to wait a minute. Welcome, Nahuia. Thank you very much for coming this morning. We're sorry you have to wear masks, but if you can speak easier, you're welcome to take yours off, because you're a couple of metres away from us. And we're going to give you 10 minutes to speak. At about 9 minutes, we'll ring a bell, and then after that, some councillors might like to ask you some questions, and then we'll get you to stay in the room while we pass a resolution to formalise the fact that you've been here. So thanks very much for coming. It's really good to have you, and just feel welcome and start when you're ready. And you need to press that button in front of you so the speaker goes on.
Luxury to be able to talk without a mask. I don't have notes. I've been sort of thinking, what am I going to say? Why am I actually here? I am a public, I'm a frequent public bus user. So my children, I have a 2-year-old and a 7-year-old. We've chosen the bus to be our main mode of transport, but recently I'm sort of wondering why, because it seems to be getting worse. But I have a strong belief that you should be able to have a good functional public transport system. I lived in Sydney for 19 years, and the public transport system there was amazing. Buses, trains. I was on a stop where every 6 minutes. It was fantastic. You didn't have the stress if you missed it. Where I came back to Christchurch in 2014, and suddenly it's like, whoa, I've got a newborn child. I'm using the buses because I don't drive, and they're twice an hour. And suddenly you have to adjust things because last minute, and then you end up being late for everything, and it's hard, but you adjust. Then so people would say, why do you take the buses? And I'd say, well, it's important. If you don't use them, well, then you lose them. And it's also a different way of seeing the world. It's my oldest child, who's 7, is neurodiverse, so everything is go, go, go. But on a bus, it forces you to slow down a little bit and see the world around you. And when you're on a bus, it teaches you, or teaches your children, to take in everything, the people, what's around. If you're in a car, you're just focused ahead. And you've got this talk, which is, it's stressful. The way the bus system at the moment, it's stressful. You've reduced it to once an hour on my main bus route, which is it's hard, but okay. I remember it being once an hour, the 17, when I was a teenager back in the 90s, like 30 years ago. So something's seriously wrong if it's not getting better in 30 plus years. It's not fit for purpose. Christchurch is expanding very quickly. There's changes happening really quickly. And the system is just not set up, and it needs to change now, not 10 years down the track, because it's going to be a very different place. My 7-year-old is at Aotearoa, so we come into school every day. I frequent different bus routes, so I get to see what's happening. Beautiful old villas that have stood through the earthquake, stood through everything, torn down. 100-year-old trees with them gone because there's no protections. The environmental impact of that alone is just crazy. More cars, more pollution. There's, it makes me feel really upset and really angry, because you're all elected by the people. And I'm the person that's standing here, I'm a ratepayer, and I'm saying, you got to stand up and have balls now. Seriously, because 10 years down the track, this place is going to be very different. And I'm not just standing here for my children, but for everyone. It's like, come on, wake up. Seriously. What to say? And I get angry to hear people say, well, why should I take the bus when it takes, it would take me an hour, and could take me 15 minutes in a car? And it's like, well, and I get it. You see these buses going past with hardly anyone on, but yet there are people that use them. I'm one of them. My children are them. And you know what? If it's a change of mindset, and the way the system is set up at the moment, I don't think it's quite getting through. And maybe there's got to be a different approach. You see sort of cartoon figures for advertisements. Well, then who's that really targeting? So come on, you've got to change people's mindsets. It's like you have the same, you get on the same bus, you see the same drivers. There's some great drivers out there. There's some not so good ones. There's some very unhelpful ones, but there's some really, really positive drivers. And you also get to see some of the same people, day in, day out. You get to you see when they're having a not so good day, and you see when they're having a good day. And it just becomes a part of your life. It helps you be out in the world. And for me, having a choice to use buses, I think it's a really important thing to teach my children, to be aware. I have a 2-year-old who's getting a lot harder to, but I'm teaching them to be on the bus, to be out in, you know, the world. And it's things that you can't get, like if you're sitting in a car, which the system is more and more towards cars. There was quite some time ago, there was some roadworks on the 28 bus, and it was bus route, and it was redirected towards the 17, and like, which was our stop time, and it was like amazing because we suddenly got 5 buses an hour. I was like, you know, this is what a functional public transport system is. And it reminded me of how it was and how it felt being in Sydney. And it was good. But it was also less stressful for my children because, yeah, having a neurodiverse child, mornings are hell. They're hard. They're tough. It's fight. But yet, and you know, things go wrong, you end up having to run. You run for the bus. And yeah, if you miss it, you know, so often you'd have to wait half an hour, or now an hour for the next bus. Or we walk approximately a kilometre. We're lucky, very lucky, that we've got access to a couple of different routes. So if we miss that bus, we walk a kilometre, and I get a meltdown. I get bitching, complaining, but I would say, you know what? It's not my fault. If we're sitting waiting for the bus and it's late, it takes responsibility off me. It takes the pressure off me because, hey, it's not my fault, and that's a win. Seriously, that's a win because, you know, everything is my fault usually in the mornings. I'm sure a lot of people with kids know that, but it actually takes it back. So that's a real positive. Yeah, but that little snippet of what a really good functional system, like when you had 5 buses an hour, that was amazing. And it reminded me of, you know, what the system used to be like in Sydney and how good and how less stressful it was. Yeah, I believe that, yeah, Christchurch could be like that, and I can't see why it's not. Every time I hear on the news that Auckland's got funding, Wellington's got funding, you know, for X amount of millions for buses, trains, it's a kick in the ribs, and I just, you know, it's like, why am I here? This is, you know, people just don't care, and it's, you know, why is the government just not actually investing that here? Because there are so many people that if there is a mode shift, a major mode shift, they will utilise it. Sure, there'll be a lot of people that won't, but they need change. You know, I remember when I was young, I grew up in Christchurch. I left when I was 20, left for 19 years. I remember the skies being, you know, a yellow grey colour sort of all the time. You know, at night when it was dark, there was a yellow tinge, yellow orange tinge, because of all the coal and coke fires we had them. And then I went away and said, no, enough. People didn't want to change, but they did. They were forced to. And suddenly, wow, you've actually got cleaner air. That's the start. But, you know, intensification is happening. You know, if you don't actually really see it, and all these big corporations that are building massive places without car parks, you need the bus infrastructure. You need a good functional one.
Thank you very much. Something went wrong with our bell, so we didn't give you a 1-minute warning. So sorry about that. Yeah, that was good. You did very good. It was a very good personal description of what it's like to use our buses. So thank you so much for coming along and sharing that with us. Is there anybody that would like to ask a question? Grant, Councillor Grant Edge.
We hear what you're saying, and we too have frustrations about funding for more public buses and things like that in Canterbury from the government. I just wonder, are you aware that we've recently enacted the real-time information for our buses? So you can go on a GPS or whatever and you'll know exactly when the bus is, where it is and when it's going to come? Right, okay. Okay, thanks.
Is that
It is at the bus stops, but you can actually get, no, but you can get it through an app as well. My understanding is, but I think we'll double check that, just some information.
Perhaps we should look at how we advertise that.
I think so.
Yeah, I think so.
well, it's like we need to go to the bus stop and yeah, but not all buses stand that. But say that's at the bus stop.
Anybody else with Councillor Vicky Southwood?
Yeah, thank you for your description of using that, and I can relate to an awful lot of that, and particularly ones about travelling with the kids as well. In terms of the network for you, in terms of like you've talked about frequency, but how important is it for, like, would you prioritise frequency over the proximity of stops? So you talk about going and using different lines, like which one contributes most to your improved, when you get improved? Oh, sorry.
Sorry. For me, definitely frequency. You can walk, you can sort of, you manage walking, even if it's 1 or 2 kilometres. Hey, it's 1 or 2 kilometres. Yeah, you just turn into a game with kids. But definitely frequency is a very big thing for us.
Right, well, thank you very much for coming in and sharing that with us. It was excellent. And what we'll be doing is passing a resolution now, and then we'll get back to you. So we'll have a look into the things you're saying and you'll get a response from us. So can I have somebody who will move? Moved by Councillor Vicky Southworth, seconded by Councillor Lan Phan, that we receive the public forum matter from yourself, and that we ask the CE to investigate that and get back to us. So I'll put that resolution. All those in favour, please say aye. There being nobody against, that's carried. So thank you very much for coming in indeed. And Catherine will show you out. Thanks very much. Right. Just use the word chat. Don't take any notice that I didn't use exactly. So well, that's all good. Righty-ho. So we're on to item 5 on the agenda. That is the minutes. Has anybody got anything to tell us about the minutes? All right then. So who would like to move that these minutes are moved by Councillor Peter Scott, seconded by Councillor Ian? No. Oh, all right. Seconded by Councillor Elizabeth Mackenzie. Any? Oh, you got it. Yeah, Ian. What have you got about them?
Minor edits. I think on page 14, submission the amendment 2E, it has Elizabeth Mackenzie as the seconder, and I've discussed it with her, and I think we both agree that I was the seconder for that motion.
We can get that changed. Did you get that one?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Can I also just question then for 2F, where it says that it was carried and there was only 1 against, but when you did the division, there were actually 4 against. Why is it reported that 1 that was on the same page? 2F. It reports that there was 1 against, but in fact, when you counted, there were 4 against. So I would have thought that it should record that there were 4 against, not 1 against. I'm just being pedantic. Yeah, but wasn't there only 1 vote, and the vote is actually the division, and so the results of the vote should be as in the division, not. Yeah, both refer, the boxes referring to F, 2A. I agree.
I think what's happened is on page 13, at the bottom of it, where we actually talk about the final submission. So that, I thought that's when the division was called, when it's for,
Yes, it
against, and
was.
one abstain. So it's just, I think the box of it is basically just formatted in the wrong place.
I asked that when I saw the draft of the agendas, and I was told this is the practice we find. But you can't. The problem with this is you can't tell which of those votes the actual division relates to. So we'll just ask the Secretariat to take that on board and have a think about that in terms of the way they're setting out the minutes. Okay, we've got to, because it's really important. It's supposed to be near the part where we did actually vote. Okay, so we've got a resolution that confirms and adopts as a true record the minutes of the 25th, moved by Councillor Peter Scott. Are you happy to second that, Councillor Elizabeth McKenzie? Yeah, seconded by Councillor Elizabeth McKenzie. We'll move these with minor corrections as discussed, with the Secretariat taking that on board about how they set the minutes out. All those in favour, please say aye. Anybody against? There not being anybody against, and that's carried. But it's really important that people ask those sort of questions, because we need the minutes to be able to be followed by everybody correctly. So that's great. So we're up to matter 6. I'll just ask the CE, Stephanie Rexeter, to actually report on any ones that you've got to report on.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. I do have 3 items to update Council on. At the Council meeting on the 30th of September, Ben Manson and Harry Miller spoke with regard to financial cost and the realities of Banks Peninsula landowners that in terms of what they face regarding land to native forest regeneration. Staff have met with Ben and Harry, and we're also working on a further reply around this, and we will share more with you with that letter. Also at the council meeting of the 30th of September, Jay Graybill and Angela Christensen from Central South Island Fish and Game expressed their concerns with regard to the rapid degeneration of Otufare Kai, the Ashburton Lakes, and the importance of those to Ngaitahu, and sought us to take some urgent action. Since that time, since Jay and Angela's deputation, we've had a mana to mana hui, and a number of actions are underway, including councillors visiting the Otufare Kai and the local landholders, and certainly a desire and expression to commitment to the health of the lakes, and further work is ongoing. And thirdly, just on the 21st of October, we heard from Nathaniel Hatz-Adinga and Sue Malloy from the Living Wage Movement, Aotearoa, and Giles Southwell and myself have met with them since to hear more about the living wage, and we will bring that back to council with a briefing and further discussion in the future. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Now what we're going to do is we're going to change the order, and here we're going to take item 12.1, notices of motion. So if you turn to that item, you'll find it. Page, yeah. You got the page number? It's after the public excluded at the back of the agenda. Right, I'll ask, this is moved by Councillor Vicky Southworth. Who's seconding it? Seconded by Councillor Phil Clearwater. If you would like to, are there any questions first of all? Yes. Oh, well, actually, you read out the rationale, I think, first, actually. Vicky, if you'd like to read out the rationale, that'd be good. And
Shall I talk to it? The rationale's in the paper, so that can be taken as read, and then I can. Oh, okay. With the chair's leave, I have multiple questions. Is that okay?
yeah.
So my first question is, why are we proposing excluding governance partners from this delegation? You're talking about the Greater Christchurch Partnership, presumably. I haven't brought this without having confirmation that both the mayors of Thelwyn and Waimakariri are not unduly concerned by this proposal. The Christchurch population is by far the largest part, and therefore it makes sense to focus and prioritise that at this point in time there's an opportunity, because Christchurch City Council councillors have come and are looking at this as an option.
Second question is just reflecting on the speakers this morning. Why isn't this notice explicitly seeking delegation to ask for increased funding from central government? Surely that would be part of it.
At this point, it's about going to talk to government, talk to the Ministry of Transport, and I'm sure funding will be absolutely a priority discussion. But I've kept it relatively broad so that staff can work on what specifics might get asked for, and the PT Futures bus improvements component is a starting point, and then discussion will go from there.
Next question is, how are you proposing the accelerated works be funded and the accelerated delivery be achieved?
As I just said, we'll have that discussion and go down to the detail later. There is funding in the long-term plans, both at CCC and here, in terms of rolling out at the current proposed speed of rollout of that PT Futures bus network improvements. And this is looking at concertinaing it and rolling it out more rapidly. So yes, that will need more funding up front, but absolutely that's part of the conversation.
This week we've had to reduce bus driver services due to driver shortages. So why are we sending a delegation to Wellington to ask for something that we can't deliver?
I think that, you can answer
that. So I see, whilst I completely acknowledge and understand where you're coming from with that, and obviously the timing of my notice of motion is very unfortunate, that after I put out, worked on a newspaper article and brought this, that the driver shortage has come to a thing. But I see that very much as an urgent issue to resolve in the immediate future, whereas this is really looking at the short to mid-term future and ramping up a better system. Of course, we need to ensure we can get bus drivers to service improvements, as we would if we were rolling out over 10 years. But yeah, different timescales.
That all can come up in the debate as well. Yeah, so is that all, Nicole? Thank you. Moving on then, we've got the motion and it's been moved by you and seconded by, and has anybody else got a question they'd like to ask at this stage? Claire.
From the reading of this motion, you talk about, or you acknowledge the 10 years that we've got funding, both obviously in City Council and our long-term plans. I think it was in the media article you talked about, or somewhere I have got the feeling that you're looking at you use the word concertinaing up to 5 years, to a 5-year time frame. That is going to have a considerable impact, obviously, on ratepayers, because what is proposed to be invested in P2 Futures is not an insignificant amount by any stretch of the imagination. When are you proposing that this might start if you were successful with getting additional funding?
It obviously can't happen overnight. There is a conversation to be had, and that is part of the conversation. We need to start somewhere. We've just heard from a resident in Christchurch. I think Christchurch, on the whole, residents in Christchurch, and I mentioned it in my rationale, that there was a survey done for Greater Christchurch 2050, where an accessible and high quality public transport system is actually really a high priority for Christchurch residents anyway, and Greater Christchurch. And if you can drop car, and we heard another family this morning talking about having to have invested in 4 cars because of the poor bus service here, that's a considerable saving. It must be at least £1,000 to have a car just sit on your driveway before you even move. So these are important conversations to be had, but I don't see it as an insurmountable issue or barrier. It's one we'll need to have that conversation with the residents.
Any further questions that anybody's got? You got another question?
Question of process. So we're moving it.
Yeah.
And then I'll be open for discussion and vote. Okay, thank you.
Anybody else got a question? All right. Well, we'll open it for debate now. So would you like to speak first, Councillor Southworth?
I will do. Should I read the Yes, noted. So the motion proposes to note that the foundations and rest of network component of public transport futures has been endorsed by local councils and approved by the Waka board. Second, to note the ongoing work with the Mass Rapid Transit MRT business case. And then thirdly, to request the chair, in partnership with the Mayor of Christchurch City Council, to approach the Minister of Transport to accelerate upgrading Christchurch City's bus network. So I'll speak to that now. And firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the impact of the current driver shortage as raised by Councillor Marshall. It is having an impact, a serious impact on people in our city. And, you know, people being late for work and too early for exams, it was a very unfortunate timing, is of huge concern. Obviously, that's a priority in the immediate future to resolve. This motion, however, is focused on the short to medium term future, and it's proposing that the Mayor and the Chair simply go and meet with the Minister of Transport to begin a discussion on how, with central government support, we could deliver an improved bus system within Christchurch City more rapidly than is currently planned. As noted, the bus network improvements proposed are already approved by Waka. Whilst the focus here is on the city, those who travel from the adjacent districts by bus or car can also benefit from connecting into an improved bus network in our city. Christchurch City is the largest population centre in Greater Christchurch and the second largest city in New Zealand. Car travel contributes a very significant part of the city's greenhouse gas emissions, with land transport accounting for 36% of the total. A recent survey has shown, as I said before, that the public here put quality and affordable public transport high on their list of wants for the area. As we've heard, the system is currently inadequate and compares very unfavourably with other cities, both within New Zealand and certainly around the world. We need more people to leave the car behind more often. But when the journeys are slow and unreliable compared with car travel, then we will always have difficulty achieving this goal. The Public Transport Futures Plan for the bus network delivers significant improvements in journey times and reliability, but it's to be delivered over more than 10 years. It's not even starting until the question of mass rapid transit is concluded. With support from central government, the bus network improvements can get underway sooner and be delivered more rapidly, possibly in even just half that time. It's reasonable to consider the effects of COVID in the immediate future and to review the potential for new technology such as My Way buses or to explore express bus routes. There's flexibility in the plans for those sorts of things. The recent IPCC reports and the messages heard during COP26 negotiations could not have been clearer. We urgently need to reduce our fossil carbon footprint to avoid irreversible and catastrophic climate change. We have got to facilitate mode shift and at pace. The investigation into mass rapid transit will continue, but the bus network improvements are not dependent on the mass rapid transit solution, and the buses can be rolled out more swiftly. A great bus network is not only critical for decarbonising the city, it's also critical for community wellbeing. For those who are too young or too old to drive, public transport is the link to the shops, school friends, health services, education, sports facilities, community centres, libraries and green spaces. For those who cannot drive due to financial or health issues, public transport also opens up job opportunities. Those who still drive will still benefit from reduced congestion and improved air quality. The PT Futures bus service improvements is a great starting point for a conversation with central government on how to get Christchurch's public transport running better for the residents of this city and better for the residents of this planet. Please support this motion. Sorry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In looking at the notice of motion, I have no great problem with what you're trying to achieve. I guess I do have a frustration that it talks about Christchurch City and continues to be a conversation at times with the city about what we can achieve within the city. And as a councillor coming out of the Greater Christchurch area, I strongly believe that it should be a fully joined up conversation. So I was considering a notice of or an amendment, but I'm not going to bother, accepting that if money does come from government, it will inform and fund the bus service that is Greater Christchurch. But I would just hope that in request number 3, that the mayors of Selwyn and Waimakariri are consulted in this conversation, because there's kind of grumpiness now. about where our option in PT might go, which doesn't provide uplift within Selwyn. So every time we talk about what we're doing for Christchurch, we're creating further grumpiness in a wider area because of the implication that we're not talking about Greater Christchurch. So I will support it going through, won't worry about amendments, but just want us to consider Greater Christchurch rather than just Christchurch.
Thank you, Councillor Sunkel. Councillor Lam Fan.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I really support this notice of motion and congratulations to Vicky for bringing it to council. I think we've just heard today from Ngahuia how I guess this plea to us like what is happening and why aren't we doing something? And I know that we are well aware of the constraints and limitations and the funding challenges and all of that, but we need to sort of break through that somehow. And I think this is just, again, another way of trying to draw attention to this place and really appeal to the fact that we have a plan, that we want to get somewhere and we just need some help with the investment. So yeah, really support it and thank you, Councillor Southwell.
Thank you, Councillor Lam. Councillor Clare, and then your turn.
Councillor Sunkel's shared some of the views already that I've got written down here, and it is around the governance partners of the Greater Christchurch Partnership. So that is not only Christchurch City, but the partners, the adjoining districts who are part of the city network that we provide in public transport. Most of you will know that I strongly support improving the bus service rather than in preference to anything around rates. I think that doing that is the most valuable place to spend some constrained funds, but I am very aware that the real world that we're now operating in and are likely to operate in for probably the next 2 or 3 years of driver shortages, COVID, and other things is probably going to be a significant limiting factor on this. So I've got some real concerns. I'm disappointed that the mayors of the Selwyn district and Waimakariri district were informed quite late in the piece. While they weren't going to rock the boat, certainly Mayor Dan Gordon did want to be part of the conversation. Was my take on a Teams meeting that we had around this. So I too would like to see if it was going to be our chair and the Mayor of Christchurch City, that the other 2 mayors also attend or be invited.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Elizabeth McKenzie.
Yeah, I just want to speak in support of this notice of motion. I think it's what we need. The Minister has indicated that he wants to see more skin in the game from us, and I think doing this shows that we really are committed to getting a really good public transport system in Christchurch and Canterbury. I guess one thing that I'm really worried about that we need to really pin down is the bus driver shortage, because I don't think it's a short-term issue. Bus driver shortage is actually a worldwide issue, and there are multiple reasons. One of the reasons is associated with the age demographic of the bus drivers, and they're retiring. They're also at that age more susceptible to COVID. They might not want to drive. The other issue is around a gender demographic. Women don't tend to be as many women bus drivers. Is that because we don't provide good childcare? What are these reasons? We need to really know exactly what's causing things like our bus driver shortage in order to actually address the bus service issue. So yeah, I would just sort of add that note that we do need to do that work, but I wholeheartedly support this motion.
Councillor Grant Edge.
Thanks, Chair. I mean, this motion is really just requesting that that the Mayor of Christchurch and the chair visits the Minister of Transport just to remind them about trying to accelerate the upgrading of Christchurch City's buses. And by reference there, inference, if you like, it is including the Greater Christchurch Partnership. My understanding is that Selwyn District Council and Waimakariri District Council mayors have been informed of the meeting. They have given some support for it. The Greater Christchurch Partnership has a program underway to address many of the issues about transport. The same with our own Transport and Urban Development Committee, our regional transport committee, the same. We are striving to improve the service of transport throughout Canterbury, and this is just another way of having a meeting. And in March next year, the Greater Christchurch Partnership will have its first urban growth partnership meeting with the ministers, and I'm sure that this issue and the matters about transport generally across the partnership will be raised at that meeting, and that will be very productive as well. So this is just a precursor to a meeting that's going to follow on in March with all of the partnership, and we're all aware of what needs to be done in the future. And certainly the programs that we have in our own transport and urban development, the PT Future scheme, that's all in train, and the same with the regional transport committee. And we reported at our meeting last week of the program that they have in place in terms of one part of their program is to strive for effective advocacy for central government, and that's exactly what this is all about, just advocating more funding and more look at what we're doing here in Canterbury from the ministers. So I'm supportive of taking that next step and doing as much as we can to advocate for our position.
Thank you, Councillor Edge. Councillor Phil Clearwater.
I'm very happy to second this motion that Councillor Vicky Southworth has very wisely put forward. To me, it's simple. Going out and talking should be straightforward, and I'm sure that this will be. Councillor Edge has referred to other conversations that the partnership have, and of course they happen. In my clear understanding is that the mayors of the other councils are well aware of the request for this conversation. This conversation and partnership with City Council is extremely important because, in fact, when we're talking about PT Futures, and that's what this is about, we're actually talking about the core of the problem of transport that our submitters talk to us today. And that is currently right in the city that our public transport moves too slowly. And that is where I've got no doubt that Councillor Southworth's notice of motion is aimed at this, that we start making a shift in this vitally important area that we heard very clearly about today. At times, and I think it's important for us as councillors to, I think, make a note to ourselves. And in fact, Chair Huey's position in this region is extremely important. And this resolution simply asks us as a council to support that, so that in fact we get what we all want. And that is that we get, of course, the funding part is going to come up in the conversation. There's no question of that. I'm just going to remind councillors too that my recollection is that every councillor here supported mode shift. And the essential part of that is right in Christchurch City. So basically, councillors, we just need to do it and get on with it.
Thank you, Councillor Clearwater. Tumu Taiao, Yvette Greenwell. Yvette Couch-Lewis. Sorry, Yvette.
Not that close. I'm thrown now, Jenny. Okay. Kia ora, and thank you, Vicky, for bringing this motion to our attention. I agree with you that there is a need for further funding. The reason I agree with you in terms of further funding is that the very people that came in today from Rapaki and Cass Bay, I want to remind you why they were sitting there. Because this council reduced their bus trips in and out of Rapaki, Cass Bay, Corsair Bay, Littleton. It was reduced in the last annual plan. It was submitted on by all the bays in terms of looking at supporting the schools, the high school kids to be able to get to school. It also supported kaumātua from each of those bays to be able to go backwards and forwards on their fare card within a certain period of time. So yes, there is a definite need to look at the needs of the community. But one of the reasons why it was reduced was because the lack of numbers that were on those buses did not meet the overheads of actually running those buses. And that was the reason given in our letter as to why they were cut. So if additional funding can be found to enable to meet those costs, then yes, I think this council should be looking at that. However, there is a however in it, and that is, I actually support Councillor Sucking in terms of looking at that wider Greater Canterbury region, because the needs of Rapaki are the needs of the people in Kaikoura, Aotearoa, Waiho, are the same types of needs that are needed that our people were talking about in that submission from Rapaki. So it is looking, if the messages can be out in terms of looking at that Greater Canterbury region and those needs, then fine. And Vicky, if we can get additional funding to enable that to happen, then great. But I just want to remind you of that greater one, and it was made, and why those people were sitting there. It was definitely because the need was not meeting the overall costs. Kia ora.
Thank you, Councillor Peter Scott.
Thank you. And of course, we all see things through different eyes. I'm looking through the eyes of the Transport Committee, and I'm wondering why this issue never came to the Transport Committee. I therefore question the purpose of the Transport Committee if this is a transport issue and we haven't heard of it, and we haven't been asked for the support to bump it up to this council in terms of this motion. So that worries me a bit. I'm thinking, I'm wondering, is it because we're ineffective in terms of the committee structure we've put up? So that's a question I'm asking myself. I'm not asking you that at all. Look, of course, it's good to develop. Are you right? Of course, it's good to develop relationships with ministers. I'm not doubting that at all. But we've also got to look at the facts that we try to bring to this council through the Transport Committee, through the RTC Committee, in terms of the National Land Transport Fund, where you will get this money from. That's where you'll get it from. And we continually tell you that the story that the CEO has told us and that our contact here in that it's empty. The priority for funding for this type of work is Auckland. Unless they get Auckland fixed, this country is going to come to a standstill. So we don't rank very well. Take that message to the minister, that's fine. From the RTC and Mayoral Forum's point of view, we've been in contact with the minister and asked the minister to come and visit us. That has not happened. He sent us a letter and said that we needed to deal with Whakakatahi. That's frustrating. So good luck if you go ahead with this initiative. The Urban Growth Partnership will be starting next year. You're going to have 2 ministers at that table. Surely that's a better forum than going to the minister. Surely it is. And I will note that PD Futures was scaled back during the LTP discussion because of lack of local share of funds. So what we're doing, in fact, is going to the government, asking for a funding share that we can't put forward to get this thing moving. I'm taking that I'm correct in that assumption. You know, it's frustrating that we have these notices of motion that come to council that involve things like transport, which we have a committee structure set up to deal with, and we don't deal with them. So I'm vanilla on this. I really am. I think that's probably a good idea, but I'm frustrated by the funnel that we're pouring it through.
Thank you. Yeah, Nicole.
Kia ora, thank you, Chair. And thanks, Vicky, for bringing this to the table. I do understand the intent of this notice of motion, but I do still have some questions. The first I raised back in November following your November 13th article, and that's what is the value of doing a notice of motion for this? Chair Huey and the mayors can go speak to a minister at any time, and if it's a matter of publicly saying we're doing this, Chair Huey can do a chair's report at any time to say this is what we've done. And I think only one chair and one committee meeting has actually done a chair's report, so it's not something that's well used. Since then, and it's kind of alluded to in the questions I asked, is why are we having this notice of motion now? This week, we've had to scale back many of our services because we don't have enough drivers. When operators can't recruit drivers to deliver on our status quo, why in the same week would we put forward a notice of motion asking for us to put more buses on the road? I reflect on the debate we had implementing the living wage for drivers. At the time, Councillor Apanui said we should be aiming higher than a living wage, and perhaps had we done that, we may not be in the position we're in today. So, and kind of in that same vein, you know, a notice of motion from us asking us to work with the other regional councils saying, hey, Minister of Transport, we have a national driver shortage. We need national action to fix this. We can't fix this through just bumping wages with a local share. We need this to be an attractive industry. And it's not an attractive industry because for more money and more safety, you can go drive a truck with the same qualifications or lesser qualifications, so you don't need a P class. And so, yeah, and reflecting on the questions I asked earlier, I still have discomfort, like has been alluded to, around the exclusion of Selwyn and Waimakariri. To me, there's kind of two questions still there. What message are we sending to our governance partners that they've been excluded from this notice? And how will that impact our relationship in an ongoing manner? I also raised, like Councillor Scott did, that Minister Wood has failed to meet with any of the South Island Regional Transport Committees. He's shown little interest in our transport issues, despite us sending through multiple business cases to improve our public transport services. We're told from ministry officers that our business cases need to be realistic, and then ministers come through and say, you're not being aspirational enough. Why would we invest in the status quo? And so that kind of gets me back to this motion that we need to be in Wellington's ear saying this is what we're doing, give us investment. We need stronger advocacy to central government to support and invest in public transport so we can actually get something funded. We don't need a notice of motion to do this, we just need to stand up and do it. Jenny or Peter or Grant, as the transport chairs, could work with staff at any time to talk to Wellington, go to Wellington and lobby as often as we need to actually get from Wellington what we need. At the start, I said I'm not against the notice of motion. We do need better public transport services and we need more funding from government to achieve this. We are chronically underfunded compared to Wellington and Auckland. I think, Liz McKenzie, you said that. Public transport is successful when it's fast, frequent and reliable. This is where we must focus our efforts, and I totally endorse the fact that that is what this notice of motion is doing. I totally accept the rationale for the notice of motion. I do not accept it coming to us this week when it's been almost a month since the staff article and we've had an interceding council meeting. Had it been raised in that context, I would be saying something much differently today. Because of this, I'm uncomfortable endorsing the notice of motion today and will be abstaining from the vote.
Councillor Ian McKenzie.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Whereas I'm relatively, I think Councillor Scott said vanilla, I was going to say ambivalent about the whether this motion is passed or not. I would point out some reservations about it. One is that it is very specific to upgrading Christchurch City's bus network, so that doesn't include, as Councillors Mackay and Sunkel have included, the greater Christchurch area, and it's only talking about the bus network. And so I've got concerns about that, and I think those concerns are reflected perhaps in Councillor Scott's comments, where, because it hasn't come through the Transport Committee, some of the wider discussion about mode shift and alternatives to car transport and how actually to make a significant difference to the amount of car usage in Christchurch might have refined this notice of motion to talking about things other than just upgrading the bus network, because that is one option for reducing transport greenhouse gases in Christchurch. So I'm not convinced that this is a fundamental mode shift, because in fact, in a flat city like Christchurch, with relatively small population and spread out destinations, that there are alternatives in terms of mode shift, such as bicycling. I'm also slightly concerned that the submissions we heard this morning, well, the first submission from Kathy Lunn, which I listened to quite clearly, the message to me was the Ministry for Education closed down the bus route and has left a community underserviced to get their kids to their local high school. And it seems to me that, you know, that not necessarily a Canterbury Regional Council issue. This is something we might be able to advocate on their behalf to the MFE, but it's a complicated issue. It's not simply about investing more in our bus networks. So I'm not convinced about the people who've used that as an argument to justify this. And the second submitter was talking about what a great public transport service Sydney's got compared to Christchurch. Well, Sydney's got more people in it than the whole of New Zealand, and scale and size actually makes a difference when it comes to funding efficient public transport services. And we have to cut our cloth. It's an unfortunate reality. We have to cut our cloth to the scale and size of our town and the population that lives here. And so just having buses that run every 2 minutes from every destination to every destination and from and to every destination in Christchurch might be an unrealistic goal. And so I think that personally that this should have gone through the Transport Committee, and it should have been, and the motions and the discussions we should be having, Chair, you and the other mayors of this district are having with the ministers and in Wellington should be about a broader picture for our future, not just upgrading our bus network.
Thank you. I think that's everybody. Oh, Councillor Craig Pauling. No.
Kia ora koutou. Look, I acknowledge that there's some frustration here around this, and acknowledge what Councillor Mackay and Councillor Sunkel have said about engaging with our other partners, other council partners. So I think that can be taken into account with the next steps forward. But it boils down to, is this a good idea? And it is a good idea. So I support it.
Anybody else wishing to speak? All right, I just might say a couple of things. Thank you to Vicky Southworth and Councillor Lam for initiating this action and bringing, especially to Vicky, thank you for bringing it forward. It's not easy to do notices of motion. On the why it's come to the council rather than the Transport Committee, it was purely a matter of timing. Could have gone to the Transport Committee. There's also the matter of the status of the council and the council, a similar resolution, as you know, the same notice of motion basically was being put to this Christchurch City Council, and for 2 councillors from here and 2 councillors from City Christchurch, the council, Christchurch Council, those 2 whom happen to be on the GCP, got together and decided they would like to take this approach. They have a whole lot of reasons about needing to do it this way. As soon as I was made aware that that was happening, I raised the issue of our partnership and said about contacting the 2 mayors and making sure that happened. As far as I'm aware, that happened. An email went to the mayors, talking to them about it, and I had phone conversations with both, although I missed Dan twice actually earlier in the week, with Sam Broughton, the Mayor Sam and Mayor Dan. So we will be actually making sure that they're kept in the loop with anything that evolves out of this, and we will also be consulting with staff about what is the best approach when we go to the minister and taking advice, as we always do. There is rather a lot of frustration because there's no doubt we are in a climate change emergency and we do need to reduce our carbon emission, and public transport is identified as one of the main ways we can do that. I think transport's going to be in this space it's in at the moment, in councils and with government for some time now. And the trouble is, the attraction, the speed of the change to other modes in terms of addressing with this is overwhelming us in terms of the electric buses at the moment, but then there's going to be a story around extra carbon being available. We've heard about air compression cars and buses. There's all sorts of modes. If you read widely in this, think tanks all around the world are predicting radical change in the next 10 years. I could refer you to Rethink X and have a look. They say within 10 years we're going to be moving in some big cities in the world to driverless modes of transport that are rather like my way. In Timaru, in a similar period of time in big populations, people will no longer own private cars. And so household budgets are going to free up. There's going to be radical change. The challenge for elected members and staff working in this area is how on earth do we change our decision-making systems and our bureaucracy and our funding to keep up with that? And the big problem is reducing those emissions to save our planet. So we have to do everything we can. So when I was approached about this, I said, fine, if that's what people think we should do it. So that's what we're going to do. And every word we have with central government is of value. So I totally agree with the speakers who said that. And thank you all for mainly supporting this, because I think it's something that we're grappling with. We're going to go on grappling, and thank you to staff for bearing with us and working on it in such a constructive way. And I think we should acknowledge the people that came in here this morning. You know, we need to look after people so that they can get around and do their business and go to schools and earn their living. So I commend the notice of motion to you. And once again, Vicky, thank you for bringing it. Congratulations. I'm going to put the resolution. Yes, before I do that, Ian, you've got your hand up.
Just one question, listening carefully to what you just said. You've, I think, articulated some of my concerns about the specific nature of this motion. So are you saying that in you know, if this motion is passed, when you do talk to the ministers, you will conduct a broader brief in terms of your discussion with them?
Well, I think, Ian, the answer to your question is I already had that discussion with Mayor Sam, and he was very quick to tell me what needed to be said for Selwyn. We're in a partnership. We can't go there saying we're not part of a partnership. We'll be going there within the framework of GCP, but we'll be talking specifically around what's said here. But indeed, there might be room for that, just as there'll be room to discuss about the driver shortage.
I move the motion be put.
I wasn't just being specific about the satellite areas of Christchurch, but the broader perspective about the solutions to. So you'll have a broad perspective, despite the narrow nature of this motion. You will go to the minister and talk on a broad perspective.
Actually, well spotted, because
I'd like to move that the motion be put. Sorry.
Yeah, I just want to you took in what I said, because I was sitting here thinking I carry around the air compression card brochure in my handbag and show it to many people, and I thought, oh, I might even get that out in this instance. So yes, I will talk big picture, but in the main instance we're going to talk about what is envisaged here, and I think there's probably a need for that, and I'm being advised by co-councillors and other people from the other council who we work with. So yeah, and I'll make sure I try and keep the two mayors informed. So thank you very much. I'll put the vote. All those, I've got the resolution before me. Have I done all this? Moved by Councillor Vicky Southwest, seconded by Councillor Phil Clearwater. I'll put that to the vote. All the people in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please speak. There's not being anybody against, but Nicole, you wish to abstain? Do you want that written down? Just one abstain. Do you want your name there? She doesn't mind. You have to say you do, otherwise we won't record it. So that if you want it done, that's great. All right, well, thank you very much. Where are we up to now? We're returning to the main part of the agenda. The order of the business now is moving on with the items from the standing committees. We're on page 20. And your report, would you like to speak to the audit, finance and risk, Councillor Sunkel?
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. It was one of those long meetings, about 4 hours, where we had a significant amount of work and conversation going through, getting a real understanding of the risk, particularly in the finance of the organisation. And we also took the opportunity to review the draft of the annual report, which is to come forward. And I might just ask a question. I do not see it on our next agenda and wonder where that might be for a comment further down the line. I really just ask that if anyone might have questions that I could answer or staff could answer on my behalf.
Okay, Councillor Peter.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, on page 27, and because I don't go to finance, audit, finance and risk, my question is around the resolution on page 27 and the first 4 points of that regarding net asset movement. And if I could have some explanation of that, that would be good. I'm struggling to know why that hasn't been enacted for 2 years. Is there an explanation around that?
Refer to which one it is, please, Councillor Scott.
Sorry, Madam Chair, page 27.
Number 4.
No, the 1, 2, 3 and 4, they sort of really are joined up. So there's a sort of a cascade of issues there.
What are you asking?
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's what I was.
We might have to get staff to advise us, but Councillor Sunkel, do you want to speak?
Briefly, initially, so the asset replacement reserve and is a journal entry. Effectively, if I put it in simple terms, depreciation. So the transfer in the journal has not gone across. So when we fill that reserve, that is utilised for purchase of assets, and one is depleted and one is increased. Those transactions have not taken place, and I think they add up to approximately $9 million. They are not material in a cash flow situation, so they are just journal entries. We have noted that they have not been picked up before, and I suspect there's another question coming. We have informed the auditors of the issue. It's not material within the confines of the audit reports, but having seen it, we have notified the auditors and made them aware of the issue.
Councillor Scott.
Taking on board that that's non-cash that we're talking about here, but the requirement around depreciation for full reserves, is that contained in the annual plan that we're about to go out with?
Could we ask you to come to the table, please? Giles, thank you.
So the reserve that's been discussed in effect represents the cash that is normally available for us to purchase additional capital items. The journal has not taken place for a couple of years, and as the resolutions note that there were errors in the journal for a number of years prior to that. That resulted in the difference between additions to our capital stock, i.e. capital expenditure, and depreciation on existing capital being under reflected in the asset replacement reserve, which means that we have $9 million less available for capital spend than we were originally anticipating, which is why in the conversations we've been having about the annual plan, we have been reflecting the need to potentially borrow for capital expenditure to allow us to replenish that reserve to get back to where we should be. The other question that Councillor Scott raised around why has this happened? This has happened because It is a journal that historically has only taken place at year end. Unfortunately, that process had not been documented in the past, and due to staff movements, people leaving the organisation and people taking on other roles, it was overlooked for a period of time. We have taken steps to ensure that we are documenting and producing what one would call desk files to make sure that we have checklists in place, and also in relation to this specific journal, we will be completing on a monthly basis so that we avoid the risk of, we minimise the risk of us not reflecting it in the future.
Thank you. You want to follow up, Councillor Scott?
On that, so my bush understanding of this in terms of finance, Giles, is the fact that the cash would have been provided for in the annual plan and the long-term plan, but it just wasn't journaled into the right place. So there would have been a cash surplus somewhere. Is that right?
So we would have had $9 million more cash available for capital expenditure than we now have. Hence, if we continue with the capital programme, as Council discussed yesterday at the briefings, we will need to borrow to finance that.
Councillor Sunkel.
Thank you. And just to follow up to that, in these conversations, our independent members of Audit and Risk have noted that deficit, and their advice to us as a council is to rebuild those reserves, but there is no particular urgency. So over time, bring them back up to balance was the conversation they had with us.
Right, thank you. Councillor Clearwater.
So just in terms of the minutes too, and point 11 and what Councillor Scott has referred to on page 27. So I just really want to check that the auditors have been notified of this correction.
Yes, they have. Staff were advised that day to make that conversation and note. That has happened.
Any other questions for the chair? All right, there's been no others. We're now going to move up. Can you get this amendment up online? We're going to move the recommendations from the minutes with an amendment, because as we need to point out that there is a problem with clause 7.6 being repeated. So we have to substitute another clause for that. So I'm going to move that as an amendment to this clause. I don't know, can we see it? Yeah, like that, that'd be better. So first of all, we receives and confirms these minutes with the following amendment, substituting the words on the screen, which will be put in there and not what I'm saying, as the correct record of the minutes of the Finance and Audit Committee for the 18th of November. That's all right. So have we got up there what they'll be? Can we see that at the moment? Can everybody see it? It notes, yes, so just read that. So it notes the information in the Portfolio Performance Report first quarter 1 July 2020, 30 September 2021. 2. Notes that minor amendments to the Portfolio Performance Report first quarter July 1 to September 30, 2021 prior to its publication may be approved by the CEO. Okay. I'm looking for a mover by, you can move it, you move it. Moved by John Sunkel, seconded by Nicole Marshall. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Anybody opposed? There being nobody opposed, that's carried. Thank you very much. We're now moving on to item, the council report. Peter, on page 1, it's item 7.1.2 on page 34. Councillor Scott, would you like to speak to that?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, this is pretty straightforward. Regional and Strategic Leadership Committee, and the recommendation is there on page 34, and notes that we received the unconfirmed minutes of the Regional Strategic Committee held on the 4th of November, and notes the resolutions made by the committee. So I'd like to move that.
Who would like to second that? I second by Councillor Grant Edge. Are there any questions for Councillor Scott? Yes, you can make a comment.
Kia ora, thank you. Look, I'd just like to look at 6.5, the Ngāi Tahu update. So on page 39, bullet point at the top of the page in terms of the co-design process and the integrated planning framework. Noted that in this committee meeting there was discussion and some concern that about the framework not being on time and up to date. Look, I would just like to have it noted that you know, give support to the staff that have been working diligently to get this co-design framework in place, and that we are going into the Tuia Hui with a paper that has been co-designed and how good that co-design is progressing. So just want to be able to thank those staff that have been working within that space, and I'm sure that might not be going as fast as we'd like, but it is happening and we are getting co-designed mahi coming out. Kia ora, thank you.
I think that's an important note, Tumu Taiao, Lewis. That was a really great discussion that we had there, and I think it opened up a few things, and there's a bit of frustration on the floor, which was great, and I think that's given us an opportunity to move forward. And I noted Councillor Tumu Taiao, who isn't here, was quite passionate about how we do this, so it's really good to have some strong views on this. And look, I'm hoping for success here, Yvette, and I hope that we can move forward in 2022. Thank you.
Thank you, Yvette. Anything else anybody wants to raise? All right, so moved by Peter, seconded by Grant. All those in favour to accept the minutes as a true and correct record. All those in favour, please say aye. Anybody opposed? There being nobody opposed, that's carried. Thank you very much. We're moving on to page 40 now. That is the Regulation and Hearing Committee. Are you right to have a bit of a speak to that, Yvette, please?
I think it's quite straightforward in terms of the minutes here, unless there are any questions.
Pop your button on, yeah.
Kia ora, thank you, Madam Chair. Look, I think they're quite straightforward, unless there's any questions that that the councillors might like to ask. If not, then I'd like to ask Nicole Marshall as the Deputy Chair to move this for us. But are there any questions before it is moved? Kia ora, then thank you, and Nicole Marshall.
All those in favour, please say, oh, yeah, anybody want to discuss anything in there? No. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. There being nobody opposed, that's carried. Thank you very much. Thank you, Yvette, and thank you, Nicole. We're on page 46 now. We're looking at matters for council decision, and we're up to the submission. I'd like to invite Toshi to come to the table, and if you'd like to. We do have an amendment here that is going to be moved by Councillor Elizabeth McKenzie. I don't know, we might just get you to say a few words to the report, to what it's all about, if you don't mind.
Through you, Madam Chair, kia ora koutou katoa, ko Toshi Hodlapaho, speaking to the submission which the Ministry for the Environment has invited us to make. They have asked for us to submit some feedback on a consultation document around proposed product stewardship regulations regarding tyres and large batteries. The submission is on page 105 to 107 of your agenda. This consultation is part of broader government policy towards reducing waste and building a circular economy. This includes lots of consultation that will occur and has been occurring, such as at your last council meeting, you approved our submission on the waste management strategy for Aotearoa, New Zealand. As a regional council, we have a responsibility for regulating waste disposal to landfill to avoid or mitigate discharges to waste or air. This consultation is particularly around product stewardship, which is the first step
as part of 6 priority products under the Waste Minimisation Act 2008. And the 6 products are tyres, e-waste, refrigerants, agrochemicals, farm plastics and plastic packaging. And so we will expect further consultations on those other 4 items. Tyres and large batteries are the first 2 products to have a proposed product stewardship scheme consulted on. And in terms of product stewardship, this is where people or businesses take responsibility for the whole life cycle of products, either voluntarily or in response to regulation. So this is about new items that are being created or bought in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and starting to address the waste problem before the end of the process. In general, Environment Canterbury supports the direction proposed in the document, and we agree that the proposed regulations are likely to reduce environmental harm and that the regulation schemes means producers are less able to opt out of their responsibilities, which will mean hopefully a reduction in the burden on councils and communities of these waste products. We note that the prevention of waste should be an important part of any strategy to reduce waste, and that this was reflected in our historic submissions on the topic. And we also raised that in Waitaha, Canterbury, in the submission we note that we see stockpiling of waste material by operators who are anticipating disposal of waste in future waste to energy schemes. And our submission stresses that there is an urgent need to prevent capacity for waste streams processing to prevent non-consented storage issues such as we saw in Amberley. Legacy waste in landfills are an area where Environment Canterbury is strongly involved with and advocates for. Our submission on the topic reflects the need to remember that reducing present waste does not mitigate past waste, which remains a major risk to Canterbury's environment and people. We welcome also the National Environmental Standard for outdoor storage of tyres, which came into effect 20th of August of this year, which will prevent further examples of the significant end-to-end life tyre storage issues in Canterbury. So these are 2 parallel regulatory services where we have the product stewardship, which we are submitting on today, and the end of life tyres national environment standard that's already in effect. Finally, our submission raises the point that some information which would have been helpful for analysis was missing, such as information on the take-back facilities or clarity around future producer, consumer, public and local government behaviours when acting in accordance with the accreditation scheme. This information will impact how successful a product stewardship scheme is, and more discussion could have been included in the consultation document, and as staff we will monitor that and bring that back to you as council. Through you, Madam Chair, and invite any questions.
Councillor Peter Scott.
Thank you, Toshi. And thanks for this. Look, it's pretty concerning that there might be 84,000 of these things hanging around, the batteries I'm talking about, hanging around from EVs in 2030. There was a piece of work that was done, I think maybe 2016, 2017, and maybe it was Tesla looking at off-peak storage for electricity. You know, it's that last kilowatt that costs the money in the country. We're looking at going to wind farms and hydrogen. There's a whole lot of things here. I'm just wondering if there's a case in terms of the circular economy here, where those off-grid people could use these batteries in terms of storage. You've got that in your submission. That's in the submission, Elizabeth. I've missed it again. Brought down, Jenny.
Able to speak to this one? Are we able to speak to this submission when we present it? Do we have to say whether we're going to speak to it?
No, this is a piece of, sorry, through you, Madam Chair. No, this is a piece of regulation, so it isn't a select committee process with hearings.
Okay, cool. And we've got Councillor Peter?
Yes, yes.
Okay. All right, any other questions? Councillor?
Sorry, this wasn't a question, this was a proposed amendment. Shall I wait? Okay.
One question. Yeah, just you said that the charge is charged at the production point or on import. So is it right in thinking that, for example, when something's sold on or second hand, then there isn't an uplifting cost or any fee at that point? It's purely at the very front end, and then disposal is a pickup free.
Through you, Madam Chair, yes, that is correct. Product stewardship is a concept that we have long called for in waste management. This is the first time it's being formally used under this legislation, and I'll note that the strategy that the previous submission at our last meeting commented on will actually reform the waste legislation overall. So we'll see both the implementation of the product stewardship scheme in line with the current legislation, as well as a reform process for the statute overall. So we'll have an opportunity to make comments, particularly about the overall point of obligation around product stewardship, which at the moment is at point of creation or sale, as opposed to secondhand.
Thank you. Councillor Mackenzie, Ian, did you have a question?
It's a technical question, and Toshi may not be able to answer it, but somebody else might. Do these new large batteries, do they wear out with age or with use? If you get the difference, you know.
Toshi?
Through you, Madam Chair, I understand both. Primarily use is the aspect that would reduce them, but if they sit on shelf for a long time or in cars for a long time, then they will reduce over time as well.
All right. So any other questions? No. Well, I understand from Councillor Mackenzie and Councillor Southworth, we have an amendment, and in addition to point 7 on page 105 of the agenda. Would you like to read that out, Councillor Mackenzie, and you can speak to that?
So just before I read it out, I'm just going to read out the sentence before it, which pertains to what Councillor Scott was raising, where in point 7, the last sentence said, a large enough array of EV batteries could potentially be used for larger power storage needs. And I'd be happy to add even further, as you say, maybe looking even larger scale, but I don't know what the feasibility of that is. But yeah, the proposed amendment is around this sort of larger philosophical question around this submission, and that is, should we be preparing for huge numbers of batteries and tyres? Should we be accepting a future where we have vast quantities of electric vehicles, or should we actually be promoting mass transit and trying to reduce the number of personal vehicles? So the proposed amendment is reads as follows. It says, however, government should be promoting well-designed mass transit systems, in particular rail, and the transfer of freight to rail and coastal shipping as far more effective climate solutions without giving rise to substantial volumes of waste batteries and tyres, unlike a shift to private electric cars and trucks. Avoiding or minimising the generation of waste is the most important part of managing waste and working towards a more circular economy.
Right, that's moved by Elizabeth, seconded by Vicky. Is anybody like to speak to that? Councillor Mackenzie.
Well, I guess I'm a little bit concerned that we seem to be just when the government is trying to promote the shift to electric vehicles, we're now suggesting that we don't want electric vehicles after all. And I guess my question to Toshi about what wears out these large batteries, is it time or is it use, is that my analysis would be that even if you have a fair bit of rail transport, you still need vehicles to get you to the railheads. And so, in fact, if you have these batteries sitting in trucks and cars that aren't doing the mileage but are still aging and wearing out, actually you may not save anything at all by shifting freight people onto trains, as opposed to if they still need vehicles. You will within a certain urban demographic, but not for the whole country. And so I am concerned effectively that we're sort of moving against, there's an inference that we're moving against electric vehicles when we have a government that's trying to encourage electric vehicles before we've even got a significant shift to electric vehicles. Whereas I do understand the issue with dealing with new waste streams. So I guess I'm asking a question, or not necessarily understanding that this amendment is necessarily dealing with some of those issues.
Did you want to respond, Elizabeth? You don't have to.
Yes, I'd like to respond. So this is not ruling out having electric vehicles. What it is saying is reducing or minimizing the number of electric vehicles where you can replace it with something that is far more efficient and reusable. And the mass transit system in particular is far more carbon efficient and also creates far less waste. But it doesn't preclude having electric cars and trucks. It is just saying, you know, we need a mass transit system as well. We're not going to solve the problem just by having electric vehicles.
Anybody else wishing to speak? Councillor Southworth.
Yeah, I'd just like to say this, for me, this paragraph just really ties together the different aspects that we need to be thinking about. So whilst this submission is very much focused on tyres and batteries, this paragraph highlights the fact that actually it's part of a much wider network and different aspects, and thinking about what we move to avoids us generating an unintended consequence, i.e. significant battery waste and significant tyre or ongoing significant tyre waste, and that actually we need to think more widely about changing at a more fundamental level, and waste is one part of thinking alongside reducing pollutants, alongside reducing carbon emissions and so on. So it's, you know, it wraps it up, but you know, breaking down the silos.
Anybody else wishing to speak to this resolution? All right, well, I'll put it that we add that extra point as a new 8. So just make the next one 9, I guess, Toshi, that's up to you. And that all those in favour, please say aye. Anybody opposed? There not being anybody opposed, that's carried. Thank you very much, Toshi, and everybody else who's contributed to this submission. Good work. And it is really important to get these things done. So I think we're on the right track there. Right, we're on to page 108 now. Vicky, Elizabeth, I think. Vicky, I think. Did we move them all?
Yeah.
I've got to go back to the substantive motion. Sorry, thank you. Where the hell is it? Okay, so we need Vicky and Elizabeth to move the substantive motion. It's easy enough to do that. I've been observing that people have been doing that lately. We revert now to making that the substantive motion. So I'll have that Vicky move the whole thing as a substantive motion, seconded by, who was seconding it? Elizabeth Mackenzie. Oh, the other way round. Well, I just changed it that time. So have it whichever way you like. And I'll put it to the vote. All those in favour, please say aye. All those against, there being nobody against, that's carried. Thank you very much. Thanks for pointing that out to me. Page 108, we're moving on to now. That is the council climate emergency update. Vicky, you were going to speak to this, I believe.
Actually, no, Liz is going to speak to this.
Yeah, so I'll just speak to this briefly, and then we'll have staff to the table to explain a bit more in depth and to take questions. So this is about how our regional transport plans are addressing climate change issues in relation to emissions. So on the 1st of July 2021, the Canterbury Regional Land Transport Plan became operative. The plan involves 5.5 billion worth of a program of maintenance of improvement over the next 10 years, and it aims to reduce emissions in the region by 30% by 2030. Through the Regional Transport Committee and the Mayoral Forum, Environment Canterbury has submitted to Government on the proposed government pathway to net zero and also on the emissions reduction plan. Both submissions advocated for initiatives to disincentivise private vehicle travel and to increase investment in active transport and public transport. They also recommend rapid adaptation measures like road space reallocation, along with more investment in rail and coastal shipping, and a revision of the way that transport is funded in New Zealand. In terms of emission reductions, our staff are currently undertaking research to determine the public's views on potential transport emission solutions, and they're also providing input into the development of new tools to measure emissions accurately. Environment Canterbury staff are working to improve the resilience of our transport network, which is exposed to flooding, earthquakes and coastal erosion. Much of our transport network is in low-lying and coastal areas, and disruption of it has a major effect on the whole of the South Island. So we'll be advocating to central government to revise their government policy statement on land transport to raise the importance of a resilient transport network and to entrench ongoing funding for it. With respect to measurement of our regional greenhouse gases from transport, you'll see in your papers that there's a graph that shows a gradual increase in greenhouse gas emissions, driven predominantly by an increase in vehicles classified as light trucks, and to a lesser extent by the heavy duty trucks. And cars have actually been slightly decreasing. And you'll see correspondingly that there's a decrease in petrol emissions versus diesel related emissions. So overall, emissions in Canterbury have increased by about 17% between 2007 and 2018. And making up this, as I said before, the petrol vehicle component decreased by 10%, whereas diesel has actually increased by 60%, which is huge. So looking ahead, COVID is going to have an impact on what our emissions look like, because we lose the tourist vehicles, for example, motorhomes and hire cars and things like that. But in general, it's not going in a fabulous direction. So I've got a number of questions, and I'm sure a lot of other people have a number of questions in relation to this. So Jessie, if you could come to the table, please. And if there's any other further points you want to elaborate on or clarify, that would be really helpful.
Tēnā koutou katoa, through you, Madam Chair. Councillor Mackenzie's outlined that quite well, actually. There's not much more that I can really add, actually, to that paper, but just probably note that we'd like to bring a separate paper focused on transport in Greater Christchurch through this same forum in terms of the climate emergency update, so that we can have further discussion on emissions reduction and the like in that space in terms of the outcomes that we're seeking in terms of climate change. So hold that over to the next paper that we do, which will pick up a lot of the discussion from today around PT futures, mode shift, those kind of things. I've got Luke Carey here as well, just in terms of emissions. We're doing a lot of work on that at the moment. Luke has actually prepared a memo off the back of our recent Transport and Urban Development Committee meeting. Councillor Mackenzie and Councillor Southworth both had questions regarding the emissions profile for Canterbury and the work that we are doing. We did reflect at the Transport and Urban Development Committee that emissions is a focus in the targets of the RLTP. There is a 30% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. That was in place prior to the recent Green Paper, Hakina, and also the emissions reduction plan budgets discussion document that we made the submission on recently as well. So that will need to be looked at and adjusted accordingly as we receive those emissions reduction budgets next year. There are a broader range of benefits as well from our mode shift and our transition of our transport network in terms of health and those other active modes of transport as well. So they're probably the main comments I'd make. Certainly we'll be bringing further information to Council for the regional lens. We also, just one other thing, we had a recent South Island Regional Transport Committee's chairs meeting, and Stuart Woods from Waka Kotahi presented on resilience of the state highway network, and that would be something that I think might be useful to bring through to Council at a briefing session, possibly through the Transport and Urban Development Committee. It was quite an informative presentation about the challenges that we face here in Canterbury around resilience of our transport network. So that would be something that I think would be useful. Happy to take any questions. And as I say, I've got Luke Carey, our Senior Transport Advisor, in the room as well.
Well, we've got a couple of questions. Thank you, Jessie. First of all, Elizabeth, and then Phil, and then Claire. So you go first, Liz.
Yeah, I'm just interested in what the breakdown of that light truck category is, because that's the one that's had the biggest impact. Does that include SUVs and motorhomes, or do you have any idea just where that increase is coming from?
Through you, Madam Chair, that is one question that I will need to bring Luke to the table for.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think we'd have to come back to you on that for the specific details. I'm happy to do that. But I believe it's comprised of light and heavy duty trucks, which would include utility vehicles and the like, but possibly excludes larger SUVs. Yeah.
Thank you very much for the report. And I guess the goals are pretty startling in terms of the progress that we're making. We're not making, as the graph that Councillor Mackenzie referred to shows clearly. So my question is, like, it seems to me that if we're aiming, and we are, at a reduction of emissions by 30% by 2030, so that's 7 years' time, on average, we're going to need to be achieving a reduction of 4% each year. So I'm just wondering, in fact, are we really on track, or do we need to do more?
If I may, Madam Chair, some of this advice is being drafted into a memo, which we'll provide in response to Councillor Southworth and Councillor Mackenzie's questions at TNUD. The advice that the Ministry of Transport has provided in the emissions reduction plan discussion document is that they expect to meet the first emissions budget through a combination of the clean car package, progress on decarbonising the public transport bus fleet, and road user charge exemption policies, which they with changes in fleet composition, they think will be sufficient to meet that first budget. The 4 targets that have been put forward in the emissions reduction plan are aimed at budgets 2 and 3, which indicate that there is still quite a significant amount of work that needs to be done to meet the longer term targets. So I guess in summary, it's starting the curve is starting to turn, but meeting those more ambitious targets in the medium term, those interim targets, 2030, 2035, is more challenging. And that's being led by the ministry through HIKINA and other initiatives.
And just a follow-up question. So as part of achieving that, as the report I think implies, although I'm not sure if it's one of the major missions, is clearly, but I'm just is mode change what is that you see that as being included in one of these key goals? And like, yeah, how well are we on track to actually achieving the mode change, for example, in our own region, for decarbonising Canterbury?
We've brought this to council in terms of the constraints that we have on this. And until our last RTC meeting, we never had a conversation with KiwiRail. KiwiRail are constrained considerably in the South Island in terms of infrastructure that they have got to deliver. It's particularly constrained in terms of people for signals. They haven't got enough people to do their signals. They haven't got enough rolling stock, and that's not likely to be with us until 2023. The heavy vehicle emissions that we're looking at, we cannot get the new Euro standard engines for heavy vehicles into this country until 2024 at the earliest, because of the constraints that truck manufacturers in Europe are under. And you know, all these targets that we've got here under 12, the view is that we support them, but we find it very difficult to be able to start achieving some of these things. We put that view to James Shaw. You know, we're being asked to do these things. We haven't got enough levers to pull under this. And he agreed. So, you know, the thing is, if we don't start now, we won't achieve them. We haven't substantially started any of this. And so achieving some of these things it's not going to happen.
Thank you, Councillor Scott. That does answer my questions.
Good. Councillor Clare, have you got a question?
I've got a very confused question, probably, with regard to that table under 23. Does the data that's put into these such tables like this take account of more efficient engines, for example. I note, as I drive a diesel vehicle and have done for a number of years, when I downsized, there was a huge efficiency gain there. I mean, something like 25% really. So I feel I'm doing my bit at the moment. But, you know, I think that there is some data, as I understand it, that there are more vehicles on the road. So I'm just wondering, what do we have some idea how much more efficient engines are actually contributing or not? Sorry, Peter might be able to answer to that. No?
Through you, Madam Chair, I'm happy to speak to that question. This is the data that's put in this graph comes from Statistics New Zealand's Environmental Economic Accounts team, and they put together the regional greenhouse gas emissions inventories that cover a whole range of industry sectors, and was previously mentioned at TNUD by Councillor Southworth. This one is a customised request from Stats NZ looking specifically at emissions from road transport. And in short, yes, it does include efficiencies in engines over time. In fact, you'll see that there's a slight dip between 2018 and 2019 where Canterbury's road transport emissions in aggregate actually decreased, and much of that we believe is being driven by changes in the efficiencies of the fleet over time.
There's two things I forgot. 90% of our freight in Canterbury is internal. So for us to have any major effect in terms of what's going on in Canterbury, we need to join up the rest of the South Island. So it becomes a South Island freight story. We've just had the Minister announce $30 million to go into coastal shipping. We see that as a great big component around resilience and also carbon reduction. The other thing that's quite astounding here is the amount of inbound freight coming into New Zealand. Christmas cracker freight, Tane calls it, because it's got a little bit inside it and lots of packaging. And so that means like a 20-ton container or 40-foot container might have 2 ton of boxes in it coming internally. The other thing that's happening is that there's a lot of air freight. They're repurposing Dreamliners to fly freight around the world. You can order a box out of wherever in the States and it can be here next week. So we're actually confusing what we're trying to do here because of the normal lines of freight are drying up. We're going to get these ferries coming into Picton that can disgorge 3 trains and like 500-600 cars. And that constraint in terms of what's coming into the South Island is going to be massive. Are we set up on rail to do that? I don't think so anytime soon. So the things that we need to be doing as a regional council is to ensure that we have South Island conversations, because this is going to affect all of the South Island, and we are doing that. So, you know, that frustrates me. This really does frustrate me that this comes in under the climate change portfolio when we're working so hard to try and achieve some of these things. I'm not having a crack at you, Elizabeth and Vicky, but it's a frustrating thing.
Just a minute, Vicky and then Phil.
Yeah, first, sorry, I'll just respond to that comment in that the whole point of this climate change piece in our council meeting was to be able to bring all of the different portfolios through the lens of climate change. So that, and I've repeated that several times, and so hence we've had, I think, Lan talk about biodiversity and the connection with climate change. So that was the whole point. So this was your moment, and thank you very much for your contribution, and totally hear the frustration and understand. And yeah, let's work together on that. Just looking at your, there was the submission on the Hikina to Kohupara, and I note in there that that submission supported biofuels, which I think also came up in the emissions reduction plan discussion and that's one of those more quick things in theory. Do you know in practice, are we making any progress on that?
Trial underway in South Canterbury on biofuels on heavy vehicles. I think it's just started with Tumu Transport in Aotearoa, maybe. I'm not sure.
If I may, Madam Chair, The ERP contains 4 targets, and yes, you're correct. One of those is seeking an increase in use of biofuels. Reducing the emissions intensity of transport fuel by 15% by 2035. I'm by no means an expert on this quite specific topic, but I believe it is fairly straightforward to get up to about 5% in terms of improving the emissions intensity of fuels. Moving toward 10 and 15% is more challenging and will take time. So in my view, I think that 15% target is quite ambitious. It's being driven nationally and is really outside of this council's sphere of what it has control over.
I'll just through you, Madam Chair, add to that as well. I think that the changes and advances in technology obviously will see us over the next 10, 15 years start to advance the thinking in this space. And I think my understanding as well too is that the existing infrastructure is able to cater for those advancements in technology as well around fuel usage. So it's part of the bigger national picture, and I think we're trying to do our piece here in Canterbury, as Councillor Scott said, through the advocacy piece that we do through the RTC, the South Island RTC.
Councillor Clearwater.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to flag that I wanted to make an amendment to the recommendations in the report. I think that a lot of us feel the same frustration that Councillor Scott expressed around these emission issues. So I just wanted to flag that and would like it to come up when it could.
So I think that's probably the end of all the questions. So thank you very much for coming to the table and helping us out with it. It's really important work, and I think it's great that we have got this permanently on the agenda, as Councillor Southworth explained. That is indeed why we got it on there very early on in our term. So thank you very much. Now, I understand that you're going to, I just have to say about lunch, if you're feeling a bit hungry, I am, but I think we probably should keep, the lunch is there. I'm wondering, do we want to keep going now? We're almost done, yes, so just hang on in there and we'll see how we go. So just turning to these resolutions then on page 108. I understand that Councillor Clearwater has an amendment to these legislation. So why don't you move up as 2 as an amendment to 1, Phil? So you move that, and the words are up on the board. So do you want to read them out, Phil?
I'm happy to. Oh, sure. That we, Council, we're asking staff to include in the next 2022-23 annual plan consultation process questions around a future levy to be used for climate action. Such a rate could be used in the future to implement 1, reduction in carbon emissions by decarbonising transport and supporting transport mode change projects. 2, climate change adaptation projects. And 3, climate change resilience projects. So,
can you just not speak to that for a minute? So that we're moving that as an amendment. He's moving that as an amendment to 1 and adding 2. So if you just get that down. All right, so you can go back to speaking to it now, Phil. Moved by Phil Clearwater and seconded by, who is it? Vicky. Councillor Edge. Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The report's very clear about the targets that we are aiming to achieve, and they're laudable, like reducing vehicle kilometres by travel by 20% by 35, and another one being 30% of light vehicle fleet as zero emissions by 2035. And the difficulty is how we actually do achieve those targets, and it just seems to me that in terms of our progress to date, and it's evidenced in the chart there, that we're really sadly behind the 8 ball. And I'm just asking that we include consideration and that of how we achieve our own part through, I guess, our funding, so that in fact we can go to central government and say, look, we are very serious about this. We've heard today from Councillor Scott that Waka Kotahi would say, look, there's no money in the coffers. And I think the best way we can achieve the change we need, and it's going to have to be paid for, is that in fact we put our money where our mouth is. We were asked today very strongly by one of our submitters to, and I took it pretty carefully, we need to grow some balls. Well, I think it's time for action. There's no question of that. And I commend the staff for this report. I think it's an excellent report. And I think it's over to us, though, as councillors, to actually ask for that action. We need to get this done. So while I indicated to councillors some of the concerns that areas I had wanted to be addressed, and I think that while the amendment has changed somewhat from what I first discussed, I hope that it covers it in a broad sense, because we are talking really about reducing emissions by decarbonisation of transport. And we're certainly, I've referred to that graph and how serious the situation is. And basically, there's no doubt in my mind that if we don't decarbonise our transport here in Aotearoa, we're not going to be able to achieve that net zero emission target which has been set. So I'm asking for your indulgence simply to ask for a consultation process to be included in our financial planning.
Has everybody taken that in, what it actually says? I'm just doing that, hold on. All right, John.
Just a clarity on the timeline. So initially we were potentially talking in this annual plan, so this pushes it out a year, is that correct? In the consultation, talking 22, 23? Or where are we? I'm just wondering where
it's 20.
It should be, it's in, that would mean that's in this year. So that's the correct date. Correct. That's my understanding, John.
Thank you. I just, yeah.
Councillor Clare.
So building on that, is this a proposal that we go out just with a question to get an idea from ratepayers, not to be including it in, should there be a positive response or the council decide, not to be included in the 22-23?
I don't think that's excluded by this, but anyway.
My answer is that we would be wise to include it. We need to have it as part. We need to have, we're going out to glean our ratepayers' views, and it's a consultation process. So it needs to get feedback from them so that we can make decisions.
Councillor, you asking?
I would like more information from the mover of such a resolution or motion, whatever it's going to be called, amendment to this as to the quantum of that, because that makes a significant impact on the discussion that we will be having going forward.
I think it's fair to say that staff are doing a huge amount of work on our annual plan consultation, and the funding in will be quite clear in there by the time it goes out. So I'm not actually putting anything right. We're asking and it will be done. So in fact, it was done doing what we need to do.
It'll have to be, my view is it'll have to be transferred to our annual plan discussions. That's where it'll go. So you'll have more chance to discuss it then, Claire.
I understand that. I understand in our workshop yesterday that we agreed in principle to go out with something similar to this in the discussions. What we didn't agree, and what I'm trying to get clarity around, is this proposal to increase the rate increase in 22-23 by including such a levy.
Yes, it could be. That's what I thought yesterday during our discussions that we agreed to. So, Councillor Lam, have you got a question? Oh, do you want to answer that, Councillor Grant? You, as a seconder, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I'm supporting this because I think it's very timely. The discussions we've just had about transport, for example, the frustration that we have. And we do need to start thinking about what we can do in Canterbury. Obviously the government is wanting us to make sure that we have a contributions to our climate action. And there's still a long way to go, but it's just talking about going to public for a bit of consultation about a future levy, what that levy will be and the amount, and it's still to be discussed in our discussions on the annual plan. And because we've got 3 bullet points there too, I think it's very important. It talks about we can have the conversations as part of our discussion process about adaptation projects and resilience projects. So it's quite an open discussion type of motion, and I think that that's good at this particular time.
Thank you, Councillor Lam.
Thank you. Yeah, I just support this amendment. I think it, like has already been covered, it's just a really clear way to signal to our community that we are thinking about these things. We're not looking at our work in silos. We are, so much of what's in our annual plan is a climate change response. It's about drawing it out and making it visible. And to me, that's all this is. It's also about broadening the conversation about how we appropriately share the costs of the burden of climate change, and that's across flooding and rivers and public transport and biodiversity and the like. So I look forward to seeing what staff come back in this space. We know we have a while to go before we finalise our annual plan for consultation, and this is a critical part of it. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Lam. Peter, you next.
I'll save my comment until the debate around this, because this is clarification still being sought, is it?
No, I've changed it.
Have you changed it? Oh, we can do anything. We can look.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Where do I start?
Yeah, we're having debate as well. We're going to do that. Let's have to keep up with Peter.
Look, to me, in terms of this is the climate change shotgun. Climate change is going to get support from wherever we go. People, I don't know if we're actually deep enough to understand what we need to do in some of these areas. You know, is it resilience around rivers? Is it moving communities from, from low-lying areas? Is it about coastal change? Is it about, what is it about? And I don't know if we've got enough granularity around those things. And what does it mean? So, in terms of my responsibility here, the fiscal responsibility we have for the annual planning process, which this is going to look for money, is that we've already had that discussion in terms of how constrained we are in terms of where we want to go. So we're adding this on top. And I don't think we're doing ourselves justice until we've had a conversation in the new year now about what does this mean? Because we've just been through the, under point 12 in this climate change thing to talk about that first bullet point, and we know that it's difficult. So raising money regionally to try and do something in terms of carbon emissions by decarbonising transport is going to be beyond us. So I don't fully understand this. I think if we go out for consultation, people will support climate change initiatives, but do we know what we're talking about?
Thank you.
Yes, I'd just like to say I'm really pleased to see this motion. We've sort of been bouncing the idea of a climate levy around for about 2 years now, actually. And yeah, I mean, the government has got issues with having enough funding in these areas at present, and I feel that we do need to do our bit. We could just do nothing. We could just let our public transport decline and erode away, and let our infrastructure get washed away, and just sort of do, managed retreat on everything. But I think, we do need to start somewhere, even if it's with a very small levy. When it's spread right across Canterbury, we at least have a fund to start as a starting point. And we're also showing the government that we're serious about this as well. So yeah, I'm very pleased to see this motion. I'm very much in favour of it. Thank you.
Right, okay.
I think Claire was. Yeah.
The discussion is far bigger than what's on there. And councillors have actually already just made that comment. So I cannot support this today. Sorry. I believe that we've already got in our annual plan, in our long-term programs and our long-term plan funding for a lot of those projects that are already potentially identified where that a potential rate could be used. And what I see this is another way of getting around and charging public transport to the Canterbury region. That's how I read this.
Right, thank you. Councillor Elizabeth, did you speak? Oh, Councillor Craig, you next, and then Grant. You.
Got it. Yeah, I'm really interested in this this area. I think it's a good idea. Of course, we don't know everything about it just yet because it's an idea that we've brought forward. But I think that it's inherent in the motion that staff will go away and look at this and come back to us with something. So I'm okay about that. So yes, we don't know everything about the costs and all that yet. But the basic question to our community, I think, is a good one, and that's why I support it. And it's not just about public transport, it's actually about the emissions side of it, and that's the bigger climate change issue. We know that transport's a big factor in that, so yes, that'll be part of this. But I do like the tie to flooding and resilience because I think that is important. And I do support sharing that load for those targeted ratepayers with the wider region. I think that's important. So that's why I support the idea. Yes, we need a bit more detail, but I'm sure we'll get that by working with our staff. So,
oh, sorry, you know, I turned you off, Craig.
It's hard to know what our community will think about this. We can't predetermine what that will be, but it'd be good to listen to it. So if we did get some support for this idea, we could look at this. And I think the other thing to think about is maybe there's a way that this levy could just support some of the existing projects we have in our annual plan anyway. So I think there's ways to be creative around this, and that's why I support it.
Thank you, Councillor Pauling. Councillor John Sunkel. Oh, yeah, no, you're next, and then Grant.
Thank you. I absolutely endorse the conversation, and I believe it's a conversation that we should have. I am concerned that we are going to attempt to have, I guess, a short time frame conversation and look to something in place 2022, 2023. Given the complexity of it all, I would like to see this conversation happen over a 12-month period so that we develop our thinking, that we further socialise it with the community and get to a space where we have a genuine conversation before implementation. I'm very aware of where we're landing today with our rates rise, or figuratively of 24 or 25%. And adding something, this is, well, sorry, did I get out of wrong? Withdraw that. Where we might land with our rates. And so I'm just concerned that we add a further level of complexity in the conversation, which then could have or would have pushback when we have that conversation with the community. So yeah, I'll sit down and shut up or I'll put my foot in it again.
Thank you, Councillor Sunkel. We all need to eat our lunch. Are we just keeping on going? Grant, you next. I can't even get track of who's speaking.
Yeah, I'm really pleased that this is going forward now, and we do need to have the conversations about this in our current annual plan. Two things. One, we have just completed some extensive engagement on climate change with our community, just to start the mindset change of the implications of climate change. I think people think it's way off, but it's not. It was here earlier on this year. But also, if the Chief Executive could put me right here, the climate change assessment report, my understanding is that it will be due out early next year, and it may in fact be out before we complete our assessments for the annual plan, in which case giving the people an opportunity with this levy to actually have some actions that might come out of that report as well. Yeah.
All right, thank you. Councillor Liz, have you spoken? Yes. Anybody else wishing to speak? Councillor Vicky Southworth.
Yeah, I'd like to thank Councillor Clearwater for bringing this to us, and I think it's absolutely vital that we have a conversation. I see it as absolutely can be an early conversation. I accept that it's a complex area, but I think, you know, many people have already got opinions and views on this and have been waiting for us, I think, for some time to actually do something and show action. I think that it would perhaps be helpful to have a workshop through our Climate Change Action Committee, and we could then nut this out a bit more about the detail. I think if we looked at what budgets we already have proposed in our up and coming annual plan discussion, that we will very well find that there are some activities which could completely fall within the scope of this potentially, and that then it's a conversation around how we share the costs of taking action on emissions and on resilience and flood management and all those things. And I think it's really important that we make our climate activity visible, that we enable all Cantabrians to have their input into this conversation, and you know, you have to start somewhere and have that conversation early, and then we can frame it and build on that. And so I think the timing of this and the framing of it is bang on, and then let's get on with a bit more detail.
Thank you, Councillor Southworth. Have we got anybody else? Do you want to write a reply in a minute? Yeah. Anybody else wanting to speak? Yvette, would you like to speak?
I think it's really important to, because of where we are at the moment in terms of climate change, and because we're looking at that risk framework as well around climate change, to actually use that lens to look across our work programs. And, you know, I just like what I heard you say just then, Vicky, in terms of if you're using a lens like that, then looking at across budgets to be able to support. So, yeah, I'm sitting listening. I just want to be able to say that. Yeah.
Thank you. I'd just like to say something. I think going right back to the first time we started talking about finances, it might have been the first annual plan. I can remember proposing raising the idea of a green levy and how it's a very good way of growing capital. There's two examples of that in the press in the last couple of days. One is a fund at City Council that was put up by some money through Orion in about 2001 that's now grown to 100 million, and that fund has been used for growing things as they come along in the future. And it's just interesting to see how we need to be thinking long terms like that with our funding. There's a green levy in the city of Brisbane that came in at the end of the 1980s, and if you go to Brisbane you can see quite a lot of green space that's been purchased by that fund. I think it's a really exciting development with climate change. If you were listening to the radio this morning, there's a recent survey out. I don't recall exactly who did the survey, but it's saying that one of the number one issues for New Zealand, who we all represent, is climate change. And we need to be seen to be taking action on that. And I'm sure that a lot of people would be prepared to, in fact, I know that from when I campaigned myself, people are prepared to pay more to do climate change activities. So I think it's really important, and at the moment we've got in the news the situation with Auckland Council where they've moved yesterday around a fund like this, and I think it's a very good way to look for the future generations and start a crucial discussion that we need to talk about how we're going to pay for what we need to do. And I'm looking forward to the further discussion in the annual plan debate. So I just over to you, Councillor Phil. Claire, what did you want to write a reply?
Yes, look, thank you, councillors, for the discussion, and I think the views are really helpful. Just as that, I'm hoping that the community also has this conversation. Councillors will note that this report is actually headed a climate emergency update. Okay, that word is not used lightly, as the residents in South Canterbury recently, sadly, you know, had such a terrible experiences. There is no question that climate change is coming, ready or not. And this motion is about ensuring that, in fact, all of the work, just as this report does, all of the work that we do at council actually is seen through the lens of climate change. And so, you know, the whole resilience thing, it is just so important that we develop that. And Chair referred to the Orion Fund. I just want councillors to note that, in fact, that had been set up by our City Council many years ago. When we had the earthquakes, now 12 years ago, Okay, this city actually managed to keep its power on, came back on within about less than 12 hours across the city. If the Orion Fund had not been there and spent wisely to build that resilience into the system, our city would have been a terrible state actually if we'd lost our power. It was one of the things that saved us. So I'm really just saying, look, we do need to look at things. This is a chance for transformation, a chance for change. We just need to get on and do it rather than dragging the chain about all sorts of reasons why we can't. So I'm asking you all councillors to support this. It's about asking the people for their views on such a serious issue.
Thank you, Councillor Clearwater. I'm going to put it now. It's an amendment at this stage, amending, including point 1 and 2 as we've read out onto the record. I'll put it to the vote. All those people in favour, please say aye. Anybody opposed? There's 2 opposed. Do you want it recorded or not? Yes. Do you want your names recorded? Yeah. And Councillor Ian Mackenzie. I'll put it as a substantive motion. All those people in favour of the substantive motion, please say aye. Anybody against? All right. You're the same as for the substantive motion. That's 3 against. They want their names recorded. Okay, thank you very much, everybody. That's really good. Now, I know we're getting more hungry as we go along, but quickly I'm going to try and do this, so just bear with us. On page 113, we're moving into the pink space. We have to have a resolution saying I'm moving from the chair. If someone would like to second it by Councillor Lan Fan, that we move into public excluded. All those in favour, please say aye. There being no one opposed, that's carried. We're moving to the first report in the pink documents. Public excluded, we'll just wait for you to go out and we'll get the recording stopped. Notice. Next meeting is going to be next week, unfortunately, on the 16th. We're looking forward to that. And then we'd like to, Councillor Pauling, would you like to close, please?
Ai, kia ora tātou. Ai he karakia whakamutunga o tātou nei hui, unuhia ki te uru tapunui a tāne, kia wāte, te māma, te nākau, te tirana, te wairua i te aratakata, koiara e rongo, whakeiri aki ki ruka, kia tīna, haumi e hui e tāki.